Today I sat down with my good friend Ryan Anderson. Um, Very interesting conversation. We get into all sorts of cool topics surrounding his philosophies, the art of slowing down, psychedelics, trauma, death and dying, living with Don Howard. And I don't want to add too much of an intro. I'll let you guys listen to it. What I will say is that I had to do some audio editing to increase the volume, and it made some of it sound a little choppy. It cut out a little bit of natural laughter. So I'm not extremely stoked with the audio, but I just want to share this conversation for the quality of the interview and the information conveyed, and I'm very thankful to Ryan for being open to doing this, and thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoy the show. Cool. All right, well, thank you for doing this for me.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So we've had hundreds of hours of great conversations, so this is the first one we'll have recorded.
Yeah.
So why don't you give the audience just a little bit of background on what you do, who you are, and some of your interests.
Well, that could be a long story or a short story, but I appreciate you as a friend, and I know what it's like to try to start one of these podcasts. So I tip my hat to you because it's not easy, and it makes you appreciate listening too from the other end. So it's fun to explore this with you. But yeah, I am 43, and I've been here in Arizona my whole life. I grew up in a small town, lived in Flagstaff after I was about 19, went to school, and I started to go down the avenue of being a firefighter. Moved to Phoenix and went to school for that for a little bit and got hired pretty young. And I've been a fireman for 19 years now. And early on in my career, I started to see, a lot of different things because it's first responders. So you go on a lot of high stress incidents and you see a lot of suffering. And it led me down my own avenue of seeking to understand more about the nature of suffering and the nature of consciousness. And so that took me down a deep rabbit hole of learning about esoteric practices and meditation and plant medicines and reading books and just becoming a seeker and someone who's really curious about the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness. So breathwork comes in later into that, and that's something I've been facilitating for 4 years now, practicing for maybe 12 to 15 years. And then, I also have my own podcast, which is a new hobby, and I love exploring consciousness by learning from other people. So that's a little bit about me, a Cliff Note version, of course.
What was the sort of initial catalyst, you think, for getting involved in exploring consciousness or exploring human suffering? Was it related to the job, or did someone introduce you to a practice or floating?
Gosh, there's so many parts of my chapter. I can pin it down to certain things like my dog. It sounds silly, but when I got a dog, Bella, who's passed now, I had her for 11 years, but when I got her, she actually helped me to want to slow down and be home more instead of being busy. And I remember when I'd be home with her, there was this deep pulling away from myself that would always be in the back of your mind, which a lot of people experience, which is, I should be doing something. And it's a cultural conditioning of you need to be successful or busy or creating or doing. And I wasn't comfortable being still and being home. And Bella helped me with that a lot because I wanted to be home more with her, of course. And then I started, exploring consciousness because you're still. When you start to confront stillness, you have to confront your own psyche and your own emotional body. And another pivotal point during that exact time frame was a back injury. I was so healthy and I thought I was invincible at 29 years old. Never had a real injury at that point other than a broken foot and a couple broken bones, but this back injury was really humbling. And so I was told I needed surgery. I was told I was to be put on pain medicine. And that led me down the avenue of seeking to heal myself because I didn't want surgery. I didn't want to take pain meds. And then it made me curious about how do we heal this?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a humbling injury that slowed me down and made me get into yoga, breath work, flotation therapy, and some plant medicines and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing the dis-ease in our culture of big pharma, the medicalization, the centralized medical models, and realizing like we can heal ourselves, you know, and a lot of that came to be known through slowing down. So,
Yeah, at your breath work, that's typically what you'll say is it's harder to slow down than it is to get busy.
mm-hmm,
I've noticed that, and I'm naturally a little bit more of an intense person, and you want to stay busy, and it's hard to reflect and take time for yourself to slow down. What is that? What was that initial journey like? That first, like having your dog and then being able to slow down and maybe exploring breath work or flotation tanks or.
yeah, it was uncomfortable. It wasn't fun. And I sort of made a commitment to myself, which took 3 years. Said, I'm not going to get busy with any avenue because I was selling cabinets. I was doing firefighting and I was just on a hamster wheel, you know, constantly dating or whatever I was doing to get away from myself, busyness, which was all good. I think it's a phase and we go through different cycles, but I remember paying money early on. This was 15 years ago, driving across town and laying in the float tanks and questioning myself, like, what are you doing? Are you, because I knew the inner chatter from cultural conditioning was like, you're wasting money and time, you're lazy, or, you know, there's a lot of the program judgment in there. And I remember feeling that. Same thing with plant medicines. It's like the initial hour could always be judgment,
Mm-hmm.
self-judgment and external judgment, and worrying about what people think. And then realizing for myself that it, first of all, it takes courage to be slow, to slow it down, and to get comfortable with your own self, even if it's not comfortable, getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And my first few floats were horrible. You know, they weren't fun. I wanted to get out. I was somewhat bored. And it made me want to go back. I was like, geez, if I can't be alone with myself for an hour, then, you know, I'm not going to be happy anywhere. And I had a book on my shelf that I read years later called Wherever You Go, There You Are by John Kabat-Zinn. And just the title of the book and knowing it was in my field at that time was helpful because I would think of that mantra and I knew it was true. And it is true. It's like, all right, it doesn't matter what your external circumstance is. It can be stripped of you. And how do I become okay inside of that space, whatever it is? Because you read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, or I like to read books about hardships and how human beings have withstood suffering. And it makes me curious because I'm like, those are our leaders, our teachers, and they have transmissions through writing, which takes courage to slow down enough to actually put forth a book that has so much trimming the fat and actually trying to really portray something of significance that then transcends your body, your ego, because it's going to outlive you. And Man's Search for Meaning is just one of many examples of a good text where you're like, geez, that's a human being that did that. And I still want to be empowered by truth and by what's within me, not what's outside of me, which is freedom. To me, freedom is from within. Liberty can be stripped from us, which we could be in an authoritarian dictatorship tomorrow. And I don't want that, of course. But if I am, I don't have to worry about it because I know that inside of that container, I think I've done some of my own work that I would hope that I know that there's meaning in that. I will create meaning and I will create an opportunity to find a way to serve others. And I'll also be grateful inside of that. And gratitude is the ultimate prayer for me. So
choosing your state of being or being able to sit with yourself enough to find that place of peace and to find that happiness within yourself, just knowing that, again, anything external can be stripped from you. And I do feel that a lot of people go towards relationships or money or just ongoing busyness where they're separating from themselves and they're trying to create okayness from the outside, and that really can be not it's not fulfilling necessarily. So I find that interesting, and I'm sure you see it in your field. And one thing I wanted to kind of ask you about, because when we speak and you have these esoteric interests and you're interested in reading about shamanism and plant medicine and
really intense philosophies, but then you have this job as a firefighter where you have to see often people's worst day as your work day, and then you have to come home and you're exploring all of these intense things as well and going through your own journey. Do you feel like that has been humbling? And do you feel like that's also kept you grounded while you were exploring these more intense?
Yeah, I think for me, I have to understand as a medicinal practice. And otherwise, you can avoid it and get busy. And that's fine. I actually have realized that not everyone should be me, right? Like my own nature is passionate curiosity, and I'm always learning, and I'm always curious about the nature of consciousness. And then I've had to realize, my good friend might be interested in engineering and focused on building things, and my other friend might be raising children and just trying to have a second job. And so I've had to really see the differences or what the beauty is in human beings and just embrace my weirdness and go, I'm going to follow my own curiosity and my own wonder. And for me, it's medicinal to learn, and it's medicinal to create, and it's medicinal to understand why people suffer so that I can then still empathize for people and not lose my compassionate ability, which I do. I'm human. But you can become compartmentalized and hardened if you start to see people that are constantly calling 911 for maybe a homeless person or a drug addict, but then I have family members that are drug addicts, and I've been around addiction, and I am blessed that I was born into a body and a lifetime and have the faculty to not be one. And so I've always been curious about the nature of addiction, which is suffering. And so I just get curious because I want to understand it so that then I can maybe find ways to prevent myself from becoming that, and maybe even help others not go down that avenue, or just to be able to treat other people without this hierarchy, and to see that some people are going to be at the QT right now on fentanyl, and they're trying to get a big gulp, and that's their day. And it's not that they're a bad person. They just God knows what happened to them pre being born, like their genetic line, in the womb, after the womb. We can talk about trauma, of course, but it's real. It's overused, and we can go into that whole subject. But it's like, okay, but I didn't have a lot of that. I had my certain circumstances and all that. So I don't know what that person's experiencing that led them to this proclivity towards obsession or addiction or whatever their circumstance, or even the mind being just taken from them, or the soul being ripped from them, or whatever it is. I think there's all these realms that are possible for the human condition. And I'm like, right now, I'm not in that, and I'm going to do my best to stay away from falling into that. And I want to keep peace and happiness, but I'm also going to try to have a way to adding value to others to some degree. So having a life of service to some degree. So breathwork to me is like, I love sharing that with people to help them regulate the nervous system and remember they have this tool within them. And it's an amazing tool that trumps all tools. And I'm good at firefighters. I realized, and all first responders are good at triage. And it's something that you just learn by doing. So you go into a really nasty call where a bus rolls over and there's people everywhere. And sometimes the best decision is to, first of all, see how many resources you need, and get someone to communicate that for you. Or there's things that trump other things, and we have to get really good at making the best decision that's going to have the most bang for your buck outcome. And a lot of times I think that is the root of suffering too, is being overwhelmed and not knowing where to begin. And sometimes it's fundamental nervous system management. And our job as first responders is actually nervous system managers, our own first. Because if I'm caught up in the adrenaline of the scene, if the chaos, that's contagious. And chaos is contagious. But if I breathe on my way to the call, and I'm regulated before I even get to work, and I'm doing certain things that allow me to actually have the ecosystem to be capable of doing that, which a lot of times it just seems like it just happens. But I think almost all first responders are trying their best to take care of their mental fitness, their physical fitness, their whole ecosystem. But we're good at managing our nervous system, and military people do it. So breath becomes the first thing, not just some weird woo-woo thing. It's like, this is actually the foundation of my ability to even use the tools that I've been taught, or use the tools that I have on the truck to serve others. And I can't be of service if I'm not able to regulate my own ecosystem.
It's a good point. You mentioned that that's contagious if you're stuck in that adrenaline state versus being calm and being aware and being lucid and perceptive to the situation and being able to be calm in the chaos. And a lot of people talk about how negative emotions and anxiety and fear are all contagious, and there's a lot of narrative around that. But that being said, and as you know, it's also contagious to be calm, to be helpful, to be a filled up person. And you're one of the few people I know that I would say is genuinely seems content, seems happy. I don't want to speak for your state, but you seem like a happy guy. And I know a lot of people who they're happy at times or they express that, but there seems to be something underlying that's not working for them, or they don't really know where to begin. So are there certain practices that you go towards to create contentment within yourself or happiness to at least share with people that might be overwhelmed by suffering? And I know that's a large question, but
Well, I know that the word privileged is overused and weaponized, but at the foundation, it's true. Like to be born, I've seen people that are quadriplegics, and I've seen people that are born into bodies and minds that just don't work from the gate. And so you start to always remember, first, you're lucky. People say, well, maybe you created that. We don't know. The great mystery is always beautiful to be okay in the unknown with. And I think that's actually part of my own, I wouldn't share this as like, hey, here's a map for anyone else. But for me, I've learned to surrender to what's true. And what's true is that I don't know where I was at before I got here, where I go when I die. But I know there's intelligence, complexity, there's awareness. And so my first taking account for what's happening on the truthful, fundamental level of the existential experience, which is what all religion and all philosophies and all of that stems from, basically this core, and it's your spirit, your spirituality, if you want to call it that. What is your relationship to your experience? And that's what the slowing down and all the stuff that we were talking about earlier presents you with, the deep weirdness of life. And until you become in relationship to that with peace or with surrender or with gratitude, you're not going to ever find it. And that's what the Viktor Frankls and the certain practices in the East and the West, they all come to the same core foundation. And I think that the foundation is gratitude. Doesn't mean that I figured it out, but I sure doubled down on it. And I have, even when I was little, I'm adopted, and my sister is too, and different bloodline, but I got to witness what happens when you fight and resist and just aren't at peace with that. And I don't know if that's where it came from, but I remember being young and laying in bed at night and being so grateful by looking at the possibilities of what could have happened that would be worse. You know, not in a weird, bad way, but just truly taking account for like, well, I could have been aborted, first of all, not been here. I could have been born into a family that was just abusive, physically, mentally, emotionally, which I'm not. I have loving parents so I always felt this luck. You know, it's like Bella, I think, felt the same thing. She knew she got rescued off the street, and she was just this incredible dog. It's almost like she had this deep reverence for our situation. And I really do believe that gratitude, not just saying it, state, like the state of being like in appreciation for the fact that you're alive and awake and aware, that something's happening from nothing. I repeat this all the time as my prayer. And I'm having awareness, something's happening, and I'm inside of this fluid, interrelating, environmental thing. And a lot of people could write that off and go, that's silly. Well, give it a shot. And go spend time in nature or alone with yourself and breathe into that. And it's like, Jesus, there's a lot going on. And my whole body's a complex thing, and I didn't do anything. And the air I'm breathing and the world is spinning. And if you can just go into your imagination and see what's actually going on, which is just a slice of what's actually going on, you should be in awe. And you should be in humility and wonder. And you should be grateful for the fact that you're having anything. And that it's an exalted state. It's a vibrational shift, and it's true. No one can strip that of me, you know? And some people aren't so lucky, and there's a lot of horrific circumstance, and there's going to be suffering in my life. I have to lose my parents, and God knows what injuries and ailments, and I still think that the core should be thank you. And I'm going to find opportunity inside of this. And that's what logos therapy is. It's choosing the languaging and the narrative that is your relationship to your experience in every moment through all of time. And we have this subtle, and that's what James Hollis, who you know, the guy I interviewed and we've read his work, it's like that's what Carl Jung and all these depth psychologists talk about, is that if we have any will at all, it's that slice of will where we can choose how we're relating to our experience, internally, externally. And it's a state shifter, and you can use the breath in combination with gratitude, and it's so powerful. And that's all we do in the workshops is slow down, and we bring awareness to the fact that we're alive, awake, and aware. There's nothing outside of that. And then we're in a super suggestible state. We get hypnotic, right? And then all we talk about is the fact that you're alive, awake, aware, you're grateful, and breathe and feel. And then you're actually deeply programming in a state. And then tomorrow, hopefully when you wake up or throughout your day, you can just remember that you have this breath that slows you down, that changes your blood chemistry, and you have your mind, which can choose the relationship. Not so easily to do. It's easy to say and think, and it's lots of practice, but it's like anything, it's practice. You don't have to be all worried about, oh, I wasn't grateful enough today. It's just start trying to focus on what's going right first versus what you don't have, comparison, all the cultural bullshit pressures, the matrix of like, you go to Peru in the jungle, and you go to Japan, and you go to all these cultures. They have different cultural matrices of what you're supposed to be doing and what success is. But inside of you is actually the true place to find fulfillment and joy. So, and I'm ranting, but that's what you asked.
No, it's good. It's good. I want you to. And, since we've become friends, I feel like that's a constant reminder when we hang out is to become the accountant. And I've read people's work and had that ingrained, but I do find it to be so important. And there is a state shift that occurs when you do take account for what you have, because you can really, really look at things and think about what you lack, and you can always create more of what you're lacking and think about it. And versus thinking about the things that you do possess in your life, especially if you're healthy and you're lucid and you have people that love you and miss you and don't abuse you. I mean, those in themselves, if you can feel into that state, can create a healthy state within you as well, and a deep state of gratitude. And I do find a lot of wisdom from your teaching, and as well as Richard Wagamese, who's an author that I really like. And he is someone that talks about awe and wonder a lot in his meditations and his work. He's a Canadian Ojibwe who passed away a number of years ago, but he has some great works of fiction and some great nonfiction works. But those feelings of awe and wonder are so powerful, and feeling into that mystery. And you, your Instagram and your podcast are a wonder junkie, and passionately curious is the catch line. So I know those emotions and those, however you want to refer to them, are extremely important to you. And I did want to segue a little bit. We talked about trauma. You talked about breath work. So recognizing trauma, I've found to be very important, because it makes you treat people a certain way. So you see the person outside a Quick Trip who's on fentanyl, and, not just looking at them in judgment, and understanding that they might have come from severe traumatic circumstances allows you to be empathetic, and understanding that trauma plays a role in how all of us act and function in the world. But it's also becoming weaponized, and it's talked about a lot. So I wanted to get a little bit of your perspective, because I know you've talked about it a lot, even shared on podcasts. How do you feel that trauma is sort of hijacking the mental health field, the psychedelic field, and even breath work, let's say?
The pharmaceutical field.
In the pharmaceutical field.
And the whole treatment models of therapy. There's a lot in that, and we can get into it. It's like one of these touchy subjects, because there's so much that I don't know, and I'm always like reading books about it and trying to understand from people that are elders now, that are writing and spending their whole lives studying suffering and addiction and trauma. The Body Keeps the Score, and Peter Levine's work. I try to read it. and I try to listen and try to learn and understand and take it in and go, this is interesting. And then listen to older people, and then listen to Marcus Aurelius, not just discredit anybody that was a couple thousand years old, and be like, this is all the same root, same patterns. And also to look at the cultural engineering, the social engineering element. I don't want to skip over that first, because once you start to realize, go on a little side tangent, but it's so important to me, is like, once you realize that your mind is like a program running, and your cultural conditioning has such a big part of you, because some people just say, trust yourself. And I say it quite often, but it's not that simple, because most of yourself is just programs, conditioning from your environment, your teachers, your parents, your experiences around little kids when you're in the first 8 years. And so, and your culture at large. And a lot of it takes time and space, which is what we keep going back to actually observe and see how much of you is just giant unfolded conditioning and nervous system response to the emotional events that happened early on from this lifetime, and maybe even many, right? Like maybe it's genetic trauma, and you can say intergenerational trauma, which is all there. But the victim narrative is powerful, and it's a parasite on the mind, and it's a parasite on the nervous system as well. And it's very empowering to see that if you are in relationship, the logos therapy is my relationship to my experience is victimized. Oh, poor me. It also is disempowering and puts me to seek outside of me constantly for the answer or for the help, for the medicine or the narrative or the person or the system of thinking that's going to save me. It could be Joe Dispenza is going to get me. I'm going to go to the next workshop, the next psychedelic event, or the next plant medicine, or the next retreat. And it's a hamster wheel of, it's out there. Again, wherever you go, there you are. And I think it's good intended people most of the time, just like if you were to go to medical school, you're going to be top down taught, indoctrinated at the same time with a model of thinking and prescribing and treating. And then it's like, well, where do these models come from? And a lot of it's developing from systems that are incentivized for profit. And once you get profit involved, it becomes like, okay, now these studies are not just science anymore. They're just being steered towards the results that we want so that we can create this model that makes us money. Not all of it's corrupt, but until we can understand that a lot of our systems of thinking are engineered and created, we're disempowered. And so I'm all about questioning authority. Question yourself, because you're the ultimate authority, and know that half of who you think you are is conditioning. So it takes a little time to reflect and maybe some work, and it's not fun. Try to throw away as much as you can of what you don't like or agree with, and let go. A lot of learning is unlearning, and then creating that space for what you actually find to be true. And it's a lot of effort, and most people are busy. And I think the cultural engineers, for different reasons, for consumerism or capitalism or different elements, are going to capture attention. And so attention is the ultimate resource and commodity. And right now it's probably the attention economy is what they would call that. And so until we can basically gain our own autonomy and have our attention back, we're somewhat hijacked by every workshop, treatment, and programming that exists. And so anyway, I'm going into this because if you ask about trauma, it's a huge subject, and it's curious. So I like to approach it with humility and say, I just don't know. I know that we all have it. It does build empathy and compassion and the ability to see that it's a lot more than just somebody going, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So you're a little more patient with people that are suffering with addiction or trauma or whatever, and that we don't have a lot of free will. And so the more free will you think you have, the less you actually have. And the less free will you think you have, because you're humble and go, actually, I don't have much, the more you get. So being patient with yourself and others and going, it's all happening. And so it's hard enough to manage my own ecosystem, let alone expect others to do theirs. And then just be patient with myself and with others and be curious and to keep learning about it. But I think a lot of the models are being built on incentives for profit. And so then I see what happens is the trauma model can be overused. And it doesn't mean that trauma is not real and important, but it can be overused to sell the next therapy or the next drug. And it can disempower the individual from thinking that they have hope to make change.
Mm.
And a lot of it's environmental and circumstantial, and it's a lot of it's their relationship again to their experience. And a lot of it is their environmental shifts that they need to make, or their diet and their microbiome and all the things that maybe they need to shift that could make them feel a little bit better, instead of throwing an antidepressant at them, or even another session of talk therapy where they circle into the past over and over again and keep feeling the same emotions. Maybe they need different things. Different people need different things. But I think our system's been hijacked. Obviously, the FDA and the food industry and the big pharma, it's all broken right now, and people are starting to realize that. And so inside of that container, we should really be hesitant to just trust that they're doing the right thing, or that they truly look out for your well-being, without just throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying the whole thing's fucked. Because there's good people inside of those systems. I know them. Psychedelics too, that renaissance, it's the movements of psychedelics, the over-glorification of it. It's easy to get evangelical and hyped up about it and think it's the wonder drug that's going to help everyone. There's potential for help. I've seen it, I've experienced it, but I've also seen people using it for profit. Or for manipulation, or also seen people get destabilized in it. So,
Well, I've noticed with trauma specifically, again, when I first got into Dr. Gabor Mate, I felt enlightened. I didn't think about trauma as much. I felt a connection between trauma and personality and disease in the body, and it was enlightening work. What I noticed as well over time is that this word trauma in the medical system and in the mental health field, and even in yoga and breath work, is the prominent focus. And then that does create victimhood as a consequence, because it's a continuous hyper focus on trauma versus addressing trauma, understanding it, always being alert to it, but also not victimizing yourself and say, well, I have PTSD. A lot of people say that now, like I have PTSD, or I just have trauma, or they're always looking at the things that they didn't receive, or the bad things that happened to them, and it keeps them stuck. And like you said, going to the next workshop, and now there's ketamine clinics popping up, and the whole renaissance of psychedelics, which I kind of wanted to get into, is largely based around trauma and suffering, and it's about going internally. And I don't have a ton of experience in this field, so I don't want to put anyone down and act like I know and I have tons of experience with this stuff, but I do know that inspiring curiosity, wonder, and getting outside of yourself in those hypnotic states is equally, if not more important, than going internally. And if it's not addressed, and I want you to maybe elaborate on this too, if it's not addressed, do you feel like people can hyper-focus on the self, and then they're in a hypnotic state thinking that they're victims and they're under the influence of this medical person? Or how do you see that unfolding in your experience with breath work and people coming to you? I know you've helped a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a big conversation, and it's like you gotta approach it a little bit carefully, because you just don't know. Again, I like to approach all of it as like, I'm very open and I'm curious. And yeah, I can see a lot of messiness and stuff. That the problem is that most people don't want to talk about the dark side, the shadow side, or the problems. It's like that's one of the biggest issues, is the conversation's not full. It's half. It's the good. And a lot of people naively, including me when I first started getting into it, thought everybody needed to do psychedelics, early on. I've had Don Howard and all these people, all the good experiences. Everyone's going to use these for good. And it took some years to read and learn and experience through subjective meeting people and seeing the patterns of what can happen with these tools, or these things are non-specific amplifiers, and they're suggestibility amplifiers. So they're incredibly useful for healing if done correctly, or for that purpose, or they can be used for manipulation and putting you into certain states that now you're more able to be receiving information in a certain way. And they have been for thousands of years used for good and bad. It's not like there's always been this positive interaction with psychedelics. And same thing with hypnosis, super powerful tool, but super dangerous if you have some power dynamic going on. And right now, it's almost like I've heard Jamie Wheel rip it apart pretty good, but it's like the blind leading the blind, and a lot of people get involved in the field early on, and they have their first experience, and then they're out leading workshops. They go to the jungle, and then they're back here serving it in a warehouse. And so there's a lot of good intended, nice people without the right credentials and experience and understanding of the history and the indigenous history of it and understanding the whole element of it. Instead, we take it in the West and we go, this is the medical model and we're going to make profit. And I've got this investor and we're going to open these clinics and we're going to go through these trauma models and everybody's going to check these boxes and we're going to heal people and use it as medicine. But you've stripped away all of the true nature about the plant or the tool, and you've taken people from doing it maybe in a certain setting, and now they're doing it in a setting with an authoritarian model where there's a person in the room who's probably not qualified. Sometimes you might get lucky, but most of these doctors and most of these people that are serving the medicine, even if they have good intentions, maybe they shouldn't be sitting in the room with you. Maybe they haven't spent enough time working out their own stuff, and now you're in this super vulnerable hypnotic state. And what's your integration program look like, if any? Some of these people just pop you on a ketamine drip, leave the room, come back, and then they send you to your car and you're on your way. And I know other clinics who have months and months of preparation, and then you have your session with a person that cares, which is a very small percentage of the people in the psychedelic community that I would ever trust. As Don Howard said, he's like 95% of these people that call themselves shamans they're not, or they're not good. They're not in good spaces. And so it's super dangerous. And so I'm very skeptical and I'm very hesitant to give my consciousness in the most suggestible state, most amplified state over to any person. And so even in breathwork, I'm very careful, it's like, don't say much because I don't want to be programming people with my ideas when they're in those states, and make sure that people know that they can trust themselves to slow it down or do nothing. How about you just lay there and you showed up, you've already done enough. And of course, no filming, like, marketing people's vulnerabilities, something I'm not a fan of, but there's just a lot of care. And so then you're careful because you're full of care. It's like, I think we should be more careful in approaching tools that shape consciousness. And what's happening now is it's the opposite of that. It's like, let's everybody run towards the business model. Let's say it's all about healing trauma. And, a lot of healing trauma could be just riding your bike with your best friend and doing these things maybe at a different setting. Psychedelics have been around through all of history. Do we need to do it in a doctor's model through trauma models, or should we experience them however human beings have been experiencing them without needing this box-checking, victimized model too? Not to say that model's completely off the rails. It should exist and it will exist, but it's a big conversation, and I've been interested in it for many years, and I still feel like a baby in it because 15 years of going to conferences. I've been to 4 MAPS conferences. I've seen the investors involved. I've seen the corruption. I've seen the people that use them all the time and have amplified their egos, which is a big thing with psychedelics, is they amplify you. People say a politician should use psychedelics, it would make them better. And it's like, no, that would just amplify them. It's not some magic tool that makes you healthy and healed. And that's the model that needs to be crushed. This idea that people that do psychedelics are enlightened or that they're spiritual. It's like, it can be that way very rarely. A few small percentage of the people that use them will actually use them for good and make the changes that amplify their heart space and all the beauty. But it can also be used for narcissism and all the other things, psychopathology amplification and, sociopathology amplification and ego amplification and power dynamics, and it can get nasty. So it's a big topic, and I like to just tell people, if you're considering it, start with the breath first, right? Because it's the tool that helps you to navigate consciousness on your own. It's your own tool in your own way. And it's going to be the tool that is free, safe, effective, and legal. And it's powerful, and you can get into those exact same states without taking something into your body. And if you don't like the way it's going, you slow it down and you can be humbled and grounded and you're back.
Mm.
And then if for some reason 10 years into it, you go and do a psychedelic plant medicine or whatever it is you're considering, you have your breath as the tool to navigate that experience too. So I think psychedelics are a bit overrated, even though they're the most powerful tools on the planet. I just think if you're going to approach them, you better do it carefully.
Yeah, I think that now for real, I think that where you're coming from is also a place of respect, which is treating it that way. If you just said people should use these really powerful tools and everyone should do it, you might not be approaching it with the same respect that you are if you're saying that people should be cautious and do their research and be careful that you can get destabilized for the very same reason that they're very powerful and enlightening tools is the same reason that they're dangerous. The same as anything that's incredible has a really dark shadow. And you lived with Don Howard. I kind of am curious about that. I also listened to him. I forget which interview it was. It might have been Aubrey, where he said that he worked with these plants for over 10 years before he ever served them. And like you just said, you're seeing people have one or two experiences and then they're coming back and sharing them with people. And that can be very, very dangerous. But what did you learn from Don Howard, and what was your experience living with him, and how did that come to be?
Well, I met him before I knew him, but I waited 7 years before I went down there, did my research, and I was patient, and found him through an interview with Amber Lyon. Great interview on his little deck out there, and it was just so humbling to listen to him speak. And I go, that's my guy. I want the way he speaks about the nature of plants, the nature of consciousness. You could tell that he was humble, intelligent, and I just really resonated with him. And I ended up showing up to his very last ceremony because he was dying of a rare blood disorder. Didn't know that at the time, but when I showed up there, that was the case. And he probably shouldn't have even done that one because it was so far along and he was so weak. But he wanted to do one more. And then I got to witness him and experience like 17 days down there and see how he held his space and how he, told the stories of the history of the plants and taught us how to use the plants. And it was so much in-depth knowledge. And it was coming from a man that really spent years and years working with his heart, not his mind as much. His mind was brilliant. He was so good with ethnobotany, and he knew the history of Chavin so good. He was very brilliant, super smart. But also you could just tell how he loved people, which is rare. Like, how many older men do you see that you just like, you see someone that spent years and years truly caring and cultivating a certain mode of being? I've met lots of really beautiful, good men, but he was the most special I'd ever met, to be honest, and his sister being exactly the same thing in a feminine body. Both of them spent the exact same amount of years really caring and working with their spiritual path, if you want to call it that, in different ways. She went more Eastern, he went more plants, but they both came back with the same answers and the same way of treating people and serving others. And so I got to really experience that on the first level of not even knowing that I'd know him deeper after that experience. And it was life-changing, and the sharing circles, and so much went into every detail of the operation even before you got there. So a lot of it was preparation so that you could go there and be vulnerable and be open. And everything he created was just part of the experience. And no marketing, he never did it for any money. It was just all the money went right back into this beautiful bio park that was so thoughtful. I mean, he never carved everything out of the jungle. He built up and around, and the rain would be captured and it would all go back into itself as like this giant ecosystem. Everything was thought through. There was no, I'm just going to come here and make profit, and zero power involved with him. And so I got to really witness a lot of the fine details and experience it with him, and super curious, like, whoa, there's so much happening here. I want to know more. Well, come to find out, the only place that could treat him was Arizona's Mayo Clinic, and he didn't know if he could make that journey because he'd have to like live here, and it was a big feat. And I just knew from meeting him that we had a special bond, and I could trust him and he could trust me. And so I offered him help, and 4 months after that trip, he moved in with his whole family, and I moved into my guest house, and we became very close. And I became somewhat of a caretaker for him for 6 months. And when he lived here, I just was trying to be present and be of service. That was my orientation. I have, of course, millions of questions and things that I want to know, but it was more like, hey, that all can come later, maybe if I'm lucky. But the orientation was like, just try to love his family and take them places and be of service to this man. And that was nice because I didn't have lists of questions to ask him, and there was I was grateful to be in that headspace, especially coming back from the jungle. So my integration process was basically to have him and his family living here and to move into this new dimension of caretaker, which I was not expecting. And that goes into a whole nother list of like, that's now how I live my life, is like, you don't know what you're going to be doing in 4 months. So just be present, be of service, and be grateful, instead of thinking you can plan everything out, which you can, but it might not work out the right way. But I learned a lot from him just by being curious and spending time with him and asking him questions about like what went wrong during all those years. Because I knew in my heart, I could just tell, like, you bring the most vulnerable people in society from the 90s. I mean, this is back in the 90s with dial-up internet, and he created one of the first of 3 sanctuaries down there to serve this most powerful, plant medicine on the planet. So I had a lot of questions, believe me. And so we would sit, and I brought the big screen TV out of the back bedroom out because he would stay on the main couch a lot. And he would hook his computer up to it, and we would go through images of his years and years of taking people to Chavin and on these pilgrimages. And I would just sort of sit there in awe with tears of joy, being grateful to listen to him sort of share that stuff. But what I really gained was that he lived his life of service. And he was all about Aini, which was just this offering of exchange. You're not taking, you're just always coming forth with an offering. And life is about serving others and living from the heart. He'd always point to his heart and go like this and shake his head no when he'd point to his head. And I always think of him with that, and how he loved his daughter and how he loved his wife and how he treated everyone. He just had such an incredible, non-judgmental, compassionate heart. And that is a rare thing to see. It's one thing to talk about, but I got to see him do it, and that was amazing.
Yeah.
And it was just special to spend time with someone like him while he was going through probably the worst part of his life, maybe one of the worst phases, which he embraced so gracefully. How to die wise. That was another thing I learned in real time. Was like, I saw someone go through the dying process and do it with grace and love his family through it and love and be patient through it. And you don't see people do that well in our culture. And it made me really curious about death. And then his sister, come to find out, worked for 50 years or more with treating people in hospice. And she's like a Zen master that she'd never call herself that, but she's a death and dying wizard, and she was my resource for that time. And we became super close, and she's my favorite mentor now and friend. And I got to learn so much that I could never put into words, and I am still learning from it because it's so, I'm in integration mode for the rest of my life. I'll always be thinking about that, and they're deeply embedded in me.
Yeah, I think that observing him and his energy and how he interacts with the world and his heart is probably a lot more of a lesson than he could give you in words. But I do know from being your friend that his energy is largely influential in your life. And what's cool is I had watched his interview on Aubrey Marcus many years ago, not really being mindful that you would ever have known him or something like that. So it's really, it's profound, and he seems like just a powerful human being.
Yeah, one of the things I missed on too that he had a radical change for me was I grew up having really heavy boundaries because of family members and things that I had that had lots of addiction or stuff going on, trauma that created lots of suffering for people around them. And So I learned early on that the harder the boundary, the safer you are, right? And that served me. That was a good thing. And I had to learn from him how to love people that are suffering and open my heart a little more. And I'm still learning that. I'm in beginning phase. But he did it good. He'd found a way to do it really well. And that's something I became really curious about, which allowed me to open my home up for the breath work for 5 people and then 15 people and 20 people. And now it's like, I never would have even considered bringing people that are suffering near my home. It would have been just like, no way, boundary. But now I look at it like, no, you have a lot to offer people. You're healthy and happy, and I'd be out there blissed out. I do the cold, I do the heat, I do the breath. I've been doing it for years. I was feeling all this buzzing yoga, feeling good. It's like, okay, you've self-preserved, which is beautiful. You've got heavy boundaries, which you can teach people because boundaries are needed. Even Don Howard would say, you could teach me a thing or two about boundaries, because he would open himself up so much that some people took advantage, right? So boundaries are good. But he helped me to lessen my boundaries and to try to, and I'm working on that. So I'm in the beginning phase of learning how to have less of those, and what are the right amounts. Everyone has different needs for that. But so I wouldn't even have considered doing some of the breathwork stuff, or I think he's had a way bigger ripple on me than I'll ever imagine. And it'll take a lifetime to see that. And he's always in my corner. I actually communicate with him all the time. So that's another thing he's taught me, and taught me before he died. He's like, I'll always haunt you. And I was like, well, bring it on. I couldn't wait for that, because I knew when he was living here that he was a ghost, that he'd be gone. And, I was very present with him, and I was in a place where I couldn't have been present with him 2 years prior. So now I'm trusting that, I believe that we're always right where we're meant to be, and to just try to be present and be more lucid and pay attention to what's happening now. And it's perfect. And he really taught me a lot about that, to be more present by doing it too. He was so present. Never met a more present human other than his sister. So they cultivated some presence and heart-centered consciousness that can't be put into words. It's something that's so tangible when you're with them, and everyone knows it. Anyone that's with those two, and there's others on the planet through all of time that have been that way. And now I'm like, oh, that's what I want to be, more lucid. It's what I wanted to do with you today, is like, just I didn't have any plan. I just try to be with Dylan when you're with him, or try to be with Kyle when you're with him, and be there. Everything else is going to come from that.
Just be more there for your life.
Yeah.
So it is quick. It's all happening so
it's fleeting.
Quickly. And you always say, when we're hanging out, or if someone's nervous to do something, or you're apprehensive to get the burger, just be like, you say you're going to be dead soon. So it's funny, like, who gives a fuck? You're going to be dead soon. But it is true. And I know some people might get irked by that or feel uncomfortable with it. But focusing on death is powerful. And you're always reminding people of that. And I know you've had your dog and Howard, who you say, you tried to be really present with them in the last days because you knew that they were going to be gone soon. So what does death mean to you, and how do you integrate that philosophy into your life?
Yeah, I love that subject now more than ever. I think my favorite book, one of them, is The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. And then when Howard was living with me, for some reason I had the book, Stephen Jenkinson's work. Come to find out, Sanchi Redda, his sister, Don Howard's sister, would work conferences with him and knew him a lot. And she uses him as an example of someone that teaches about dying and death, and from a different perspective that's not typically thought of in the West. So I'm really interested in death as a relationship to your everyday experience that keeps you more present. And then you think about death of moments. Each moment is somewhat of a death. And your consciousness is always going through these cycles of dying and rebirthing, right? You've had them yourself where you're like, geez, that version of myself is no longer, you couldn't inhabit the old version of yourself, even though it's a part of your new version. So there's this dying process inside of our own existence that's fascinating. And I think the more we can become comfortable with it and surrender to it, everyone needs to become surrendering to their own dying. Otherwise, you're going to have a horrific life. I actually think it's the root of all suffering is the fact that even if it's subconscious, because everybody says, I'm not afraid of death. Well, yeah, you are. Guarantee it. Even me. I've had weird, thank God Howard even gave me an experience that was the death experience. And it's, whoa. But you have to go. And you have to let go. And you have to let go. And it's like, you have to let go. I mean, it's like if you don't become comfortable with the unknown, which is what death is, a lot of people have ideas and beliefs. You can say you're going to heaven or hell, or you can say all this stuff, but we don't know. And so the great mystery is the thing to become okay with and curious about. And even if you're afraid of it, that's okay too. You know, it's like I'm not to say I'm fearless of death, but I'm way more okay with it than ever. And it actually makes me want to live more fully now. You know, we have a guy at work that just died the other day at like 42, for, you know, some random surgery, like a bicep or shoulder surgery. Young, healthy, fit. I mean, he prepped his meals. He was so happy and joyful, and he has kids, and he's a good man. And I knew him. I used to work with him at Station 30. He's a good guy, curious. He's spearfishing. He's free diving. He's just like this really neat guy. He's gone like that. Daughter, you know, there's a whole thing about it where he couldn't pick his daughter up from school because he wasn't alive. She comes home, finds her dad. Sad, dude. Like, but the sadness of death makes you think, okay, my moment's coming. When I saw that happened and I found that out, what did it make me do? It made me go, I want to be more fully alive, more fully present, more, if you want to do something, do it now. Don't wait. Don't, you know, because it's coming.
It is.
And so if we could just hone in on it more, you'll actually live more fully. And I think it is the driving force of what makes humans different than all other animals. That's why we bury our dead. That's why we have religion and philosophies and wars and art and creativity. It's all stemming from this weird, neurotic understanding of the fact that you're going to die. And it doesn't always look pretty. Not only die, but you're going to suffer. Like you're going to break down. And I've seen death my whole career too, like hundreds of people die in different ways. And so I'm very curious about death. And I think it's something that more people should probably pay attention to, amor fati, and you start meditating on your fate and on your life. And to me, I think if you don't, you're just going to be busy, and then you're going to look back when you're on your deathbed, if you get to be so lucky to live a long life, and you'll be like, your regret is that you weren't more alive. To come alive and to be more fully alive. And it's because you think that you're not going to die. You put it on the back burner. It's not going to happen to me.
And we just buy into these matrix programmings too, where we're so hyper focused on work or holding on to these toxic relationships or friendships, and we think things matter that they matter to us. And I'm not taking away from the fact that some people experience a lot of pain in those things, but like at the end of the day, what do you want to create? Maybe love people more, be more present with your kids or your friends, and do the things that you think are important. And maybe there's a certain type of work or project you feel compelled to do, and putting that out there. And people do have this idea about death. I don't remember who I was speaking to, but a lot of people, they're like, well, I want to live a long life and then just kind of have a sudden death. That's the fantasy for most people, so that way you don't have to suffer and you don't have to experience the loss. And some people do sort of have this sudden cutoff point, but some of the things that I've looked into in the Tibetan art of living and dying is like, there's actually things that you should understand and prepare for. Like your breathing might start to be hindered, and your body's going to start to feel like it's breaking down, and there's going to be a lot of suffering potentially and most likely previous to death. And to understand that and to lean into that, again, makes you appreciate the other side of that, like your health and my ability to move. And, you know, I want to take better care of myself and my mind and my body, because I don't want it to break down, and it inevitably will. But until that point, you know, understanding and, like you said, being more present with the people in your life.
Yeah. And if you don't confront death, or you don't confront the truth about the nature of reality, you're suffering in a way that you're at dis-ease. And what is that? Disease. So you're not at ease with life. And I think a lot of our suffering is in our inability to confront some of the things that are there. Like you mentioned before this recording, like how you sat the other day and it got a little weird, and you felt some of the uncomfortability, and you sat with that. And it's like, if we don't give ourselves permission once in a while in these little containers to just grieve, which is what Sanchi Retta talks a lot about, the power of grief, because what's going on in our culture, and it's an incentive culture of dopamine, right? It's dopamine nation of TikTok and stimuli, and keep seeking the next thing to always stay feeling good. And that's what I don't like about the modern medical movements and the psychedelic renaissance, microdosing, and constantly just getting people to think about how to feel in these altered states, these or amplified states. And it's like, you got to give yourself permission to feel the down, because we all have it. There's grief there, and if you don't think there is, give yourself a night in the woods, or whatever. There's ways to access it and to really come into the truth, which is like, there's stuff there for everyone that we should deal with and process. And sometimes in the breathwork sessions, you hear someone pop off in the corner, truly having an emotional response. We're not steering it towards trauma release or any kind of somatic release, which I don't agree with. I'm okay with the fact that people try that stuff out, but naturally getting out of the way and seeing what comes up. Sometimes you're blissed out and you're joyful, and sometimes you're in that state, and all of a sudden you're weeping, which has happened to me. And it's like, good, I need to weep and feel this and sit with this, and that way it's not always there, because it's there. And everyone has that deep sadness, and a lot of the people I used to think were assholes, I realized were just hurt, or they were not confronting. Usually anger is sadness at the core. So then you can start to see that it's just, then you're not taking it personal. You're like, oh, that person just hasn't had permission or time or space or the opportunity to work with that grief. And that's nice, because then you love that person instead of like, oh, they're an asshole. That's a good paradigm shift for me, and I'm still working on that. Of course, I can still do that, but it's nice to remember at the core there's suffering, and it's important to confront it once in a while and to give yourself moments. You can schedule them in, or you can just, when you really subtly listen to your body, create that time and space to feel not always good, to not feel good, and then to be okay with not feeling good, because you shouldn't always feel good. And if you think you're always supposed to feel good, you'll never feel good, because you need the whole thing to be confronted. At least this is what I'm thinking. I hate to think I know anything, but
we're exploring.
Yeah.
But that goes back to staying busy. So if you don't take that time to sit with yourself and to learn about what's going on within yourself, you don't really know how to address this mess that's happening within you. And I don't mean to call it a mess, but it usually initially is. And I mean, did you find that in the beginning of this journey? Let's say a lot of times when I've talked to you about it, talk about being 29 or 30 and having that back injury. So that's how old I am right now. And I'm sure you had a number of intense experiences over that time frame. Did you confront a lot of negativity, or did you find a lot of benefit from just starting to sit with yourself, or both?
Both. And then I remember meeting you. I don't know how many years it's been. A couple of years.
2.5 years, I think.
Couple of years. Yeah, I remember just I always meet people. I meet a lot of interesting people, but you were one where I'm like, God, I wish I was as wise and open-minded and curious as you at your age, because you're far along the path. I don't like to use age as a marker anymore, because I've met 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds that are far more open and interesting and wise, and 55-year-olds that are just still stuck in the patterns that they were in their whole life. And there's no such thing to me as this like linear time model of consciousness, and who knows how it works, like how much people say young and old souls. Well, it's like, who knows, right? Like, I just think it's complex, and how we get here is interesting, and the mystery is fascinating. But the suffering for me is still there. Like, I don't have anything figured out, but I'm grateful for the more. It's almost like if you practice yoga long enough, after a while, downward dog isn't so painful, right? It's a resting pose almost. It shouldn't be resting, but it just doesn't suck. And I think of that a lot, because I think of balancing. And like, if you start working on standing on one leg, first time you're all over the place. And then over a couple weeks, you're like sturdy. And I think that for me, I'm starting to feel a lot more steady which is good. You know, I hope when I'm 72, I can laugh at the state that I'm in now and be like, dude, you were so all over the place, as I should be. But from comparing to where I felt 4 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, I wasn't paying attention to a lot of the things that I'm aware of now. And that's what I would consider for each of us is our own wisdom. And it helps us all to gain a little more, like, I know I'm immature and silly and all over the place right now compared to what I will be. Hopefully, if I'm orienting towards, you know, more and more awareness and doubling down on what I think is important, which is the inner engineering and managing the interiority of myself so that the exteriority is a little bit more pleasant for others who engage with me, whatever I'm doing. And so it didn't start off like that at all. It was very much just like so many phases. You know, the back injury was just at one point, oh, poor me. Like, why am I hurt? You know, then I realized, like, this is actually my teacher. You know, that was the flip. Opportunity, not victimhood. That was a huge shift. And it slowed me down to get a dog that became my best friend, that slowed me down even more to have nights and nights by myself in the forest with her. And there was so many things that stemmed from so many other things. And then I started to look at my whole life as a giant synchronistic journey that is opportunity based, not, you know, I'm not even stuck on the oh, poor me ever anymore because I just know it's not even a possibility. But it doesn't start that way. It starts by trying to see and create meaning in all things. And I think meaning making is what we're good at as humans, and being mindful of what meaning we give things. And that's where the victim narrative can be very detrimental, especially if it's coming top down from big pharma. So I don't subscribe to that. And, you know, I think it's actually dangerous.
Yeah, that's that new medical model that you talked about and that I've talked about, where it seems like the pain management, you said this, the pain management was physical at one point, and that's the oxy, and everyone has back pain, and so you should be treated with oxy. Now could be transforming into everyone has psychic pain and trauma, so psychedelics or some antidepressant. And psychic pain is immeasurable, and you can also hypnotize people to an extent into believing that they have it.
Yeah, and it's I don't think that it's not orchestrated anymore. I used to think, oh, it's just incentives. You know, it's just money that drives everything. And now I actually go deeper because of my own research and curiosity, which most people would not have the time or interest to do. But I found myself discovering that once you understand the social and psychological sciences and you have power and you have organization, a lot of people actively attack consciousness to control and then to make money and all the other things that come from that. But I think there's a war on consciousness, and there has been through all of history from different elements. And so once you think that way, not to say, oh no, they're out to get me, just seeing that there's a force against consciousness, and there's many of them for different reasons. And so to empower yourself inside of that idea would be like, even if it was 2,000 years ago, there was some war on consciousness, whether it be some authoritarian figure, could have been the church, the state, the banks, the big pharma. You know, right now it's big tech companies, and there's a lot of people that understand the algorithms that keep you hijacked for your attention. And there's big pharmaceutical industries capturing people's narratives around food that make you eat poison, basically, so that then they can prescribe you stuff on the tail end that keeps you even more sick. It's a fucking psychopathic model. And more people are becoming aware of that, and that's good. And that awareness creates a dis-ease, which creates the activation to then rebel or create change. And I think the SOMA model that Huxley talked about in Brave New World would be keep everybody distracted. TikTok is SOMA. Microdosing is SOMA. Smoking weed that has 700% THC or whatever. Now it's like they amplify all these things, and then everybody's smoking vape pens and on TikTok, and they're on social media, and they're distracted. Meanwhile, the chessboard's being played. And if you don't think that's the case, then keep smoking your vape pen and TikToking away and see how it goes.
And these, exactly. And these are consciousness expanding tools, like marijuana can be, TikTok, obviously not, but these can be consciousness expanding tools if used properly, and they're leveraging them against us.
Yeah, they can be used for both.
Yeah, and if you're high all the time, and you're not focused on what's going on out there, and you're just content like you're not content, but you're content in this sort of bubble that you exist in, and you're distracted.
Yeah.
Can fuck you up.
Yeah, and the pain management model with my back was a good thing that I didn't get swept into that, because I was lucky enough to have the internet at that time, and I was able to see the epidemic had already almost all the way unfolded with the opioid crisis. So I was lucky there, because it could have been, I know friends who were addicted to opioids because of a back injury and then took their own life because they trusted the authoritarian figure, the doctor. And then you saw the documentaries on the big pharma and the Sacklers, and it takes hindsight to look back and go, oh man, these people are crazy. So why do we trust them now with the psychedelic renaissance? Why do we trust that the investors are good people that care about your well-being? I don't. But it doesn't mean that the tools aren't there to use and that the beautiful medicines aren't there. Just question authority and seek the truth. That's the truth. You know, it's like, seek the truth. You may not find the overarching truth, but you'll find out more about it.
Yeah.
And that's a never-ending journey. It's not like you get to the end and you're like, oh, I made it. No, it's an infinite journey then. And life becomes more interesting because you're getting into new doorways, and it gets far and far more big and broad. It doesn't simplify.
Yeah, and telling the truth in itself is an exploration of what truth is. It's not that Ryan has the truth or Dylan has the truth and I'm going to start saying it. It's like, this is what I find to be true to me. Let me explore it. I could be wrong, and that can lead you into all sorts of different directions. And, you know, I love Jordan Peterson, and I think that's what he means when he says tell the truth as a rule. And I've started listening to him a little bit more again. He's a fascinating guy. And, you know, as you know, I know you've explored his podcast a lot, but
yeah. And that truth versus like the unknown and the fact that you don't know is a good truth.
Exactly.
That's a good place to actually be humbled by. Like, most of the time it's unknown. And that's like, instead of it being righteous and known, it's like, actually, I don't know. I don't know what happens when I die. I don't know if you hear in the spiritual communities, you chose this life and you chose your karma. No, you don't. I don't know, right? Maybe. That's a good possibility. I like the idea that it exists as a model, but if I subscribe to that now, then why is that mom backing over that kid in the driveway? Do you think they chose that dharma? If that's the case, this universe is crazy. I don't know. So I stick to what's actually true there, and I go, I don't know. I'm not subscribing to any of these beliefs, because then you're in this field of potential instead of here I am. And it's the truth. It doesn't have to, it's built more on a rock solid foundation that no one can kick the sand out under. If you stick to the unknown as being like a big part of the truth, that's actually where all mystery is, where the whole thing is. Most of it's mystery. We don't even see 99% of what's happening. We don't know what the hell's going on, and that's beautiful.
If you feel into this mystery, I think that's where you derive wonder.
And that's the power of the real psychedelic experience without the authoritarian, is that it cracks you into that, and it's humbling, and it sort of shatters all the narratives if done in that type of setting. Not saying people should do that, because that could be destabilizing. It's probably part of the problem. But it could bring you back to the remembering that life is a mystery, instead of it being like, well, here you go, here's your treatment plan. And, I just think big part of life is to remember that it's a big mystery. We've forgotten that. And the awe and the wonder is the foundation of a child. They're so free and they're so curious. And then we put in all the boundaries and shove the limitations into the mind and tell them how they should think. But that childlike awe and wonder is medicinal, and I know I have that because it's contagious, and it's, me. I don't have to fake it when I'm like that, thank God. And I could use more of that. I'm never like trying to repress that curiosity anymore, or the curiosity of people in general. It's like, you can be infinitely curious and never be bored again,
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you is about blowing your own mind. That's one of the things you've said on a podcast. I don't know how else to phrase it, but I think you've said that. You're like, I like to blow my own mind all the time. And when one of the first times we hung out was just consequently, we ended up at the same place in Phoenix, and we sat down and we had a long conversation, and you were reading Empire of the Summer Moon. And you were like, dude, 100 years ago, you just are 250 years ago, we'd be on horseback riding through the desert. We couldn't even live here and come to this place. And it was mind blowing. But that perspective also makes you not think about like, oh, my car is not getting cold enough. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's a healthy thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear McKenna must have taught me that or something. 'Cause people hear it in me a lot because I've listened to thousands of hours of him. But the other day I had those guests here and we were talking about stuff, and that's just my natural mode, is to be blown away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because it's great. It's like you're eating pizza in the desert, and we just tried to drive to Sedona. We hit traffic. But it's like the fact that we could even be in a car driving up a hill to go to another dimension like Sedona would have been our life-risking feat.
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple 100 years ago. You'd have to pack your horse and buggy. You'd have to risk it. You might get scalped on the way. There's no fucking water. And it's good to zip up outside of yourself and see the truth by seeing what's actually how you got here. And to see just little blips of history when you're flying a plane, if you're thinking like, oh, great, I got to sit next to this person, that there's a baby crying. You're like, dude, you're flying in a jet tube and you're going to another state for like a vacation. And it's impossible to conceive of if you can take yourself into those previous versions. And it's possible. You can use your imagination anytime you want to blow your mind. Anytime. And it's so healthy because otherwise you're stuck in the self-absorbed malaise of what's going wrong or what could be better. And that's what keeps people seeking, hamster wheeling into like buying more things and trying to achieve more success. It's like, dude, you can blow your mind without, not saying you should never achieve more things and seek more of this beautiful world that we live in. But we need to, I think we should take more account for what actually is, we're in the future now. And I don't think people orient towards that enough. And for some reason, I'm always doing that. And I think that's just what I double down on because it's so fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes you feel the effect of it. It's a state shift. It's not just some rational place. You can bring yourself anywhere. Through all of history, you can go anywhere with your imagination. It's the most powerful thing we have. It's what the float tank is. You're in there by yourself with zero light. And if you're bored in there, that's your problem. It's a lack of imagination or it's a lack of ability to let go and surrender to the nature of your consciousness. So I am obsessed with exploring consciousness because it's all you are. It's the interface between you and the third dimension, if there is one. I think it's the most curious thing. And I think it's healthy to start to find yourself becoming more curious about the nature of your own consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And it will blow your mind.
It is. It's tapping into that in itself is healthy.
It is.
I've noticed.
Yeah. I mean, you still have to get grounded and rooted and function here. So you don't want to do it all the time. But I mean, I do it on the fire truck. We're driving around. I'm like, dude, this is incredible. Imagine if someone 300 years ago saw me in this situation. Mm-hmm. That we're in this massive, super weird engineered machine thing that can pump 500 gallons of water to put out this huge fire, and it's coming out of the plumbing of a city. Mm-hmm. Like the whole thing is so complex and interconnected and weird. Once in a while, give yourself permission to just go into it and think about it. I do it all the time.
And even these cities acting as organisms, I think that's Geoffrey West or
Joffrey West.
Yeah, you've talked about that too, and that's in itself mind blowing. It's a city in itself, and living in Phoenix, especially, which is a lot of young people and a creative people, seems to be this organism that exists, and people are creating ideas, and they're going to these bars and these shops and these restaurants and discussing ideas and creating new businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And the world's getting weird. But it's an awesome thing to take account for.
Yeah. And as it gets weirder, just embracing it with like, I'm lucky to be a part of it instead of it being, I've noticed in the last few years, even good friends, and we can see that there's a destabilization happening, the global destabilization, and it's going to get real hard. Mm. It is. And if people don't think so, then good for you. Maybe you can just stick your head in the sand and act like nothing's going on. Good. That might be beneficial to you. Mm-hmm. But it's going to destabilize and it's going to get weird. And so the more able you are to sort of confront that with gratitude and surrender and know that you're going to, inside of that system, you're going to be fine. Mm-hmm. We've been through a lot as human beings, and we're evolutionary beings, and we're good at adapting and overcoming. And Plus, I'm not hooked on the finite. I'm hooked on the infinite game, which is like, I don't think we just die and that's the end of existence. I do want to think of this as precious, but I also think of like it's much bigger than us.
Mm.
So I don't know, embrace weird. And when it gets weird, get happy about it. Don't be expecting it to get calmer and easier. No, I expect it to get weird. And it always will,
Yeah.
and that way you're not like taken by surprise by the false summits. Like, no, there's like 80 more hills instead of like, oh, we're at the top. No, you get up there and there's like way more hills and now you're not prepared. So I just embrace weird as a good thing.
And I'll just touch on one more thing before we wrap it up. Is there anything right now, let's say that you're learning or that you have learned that you just want to share, or anything specific? I know that's a broad question, but I'm curious if there's something just, let's say right now in your life that you're doing or experiencing that is new for you that you'd want to share, or old.
Yeah. What's coming to mind is just I've been in the last few months. If you go through these phases, everybody does, of like you almost pop into these new little bubbles. You're like, God, I'm in like a different plane or something. Sounds ridiculous, but I think that happens all the time. That's what expanding consciousness to me is. And it's never ending. But I'm in one right now where it's feeling pretty good and I'm lucky. And, but I'm like getting better at just, my schedule's busier than ever because I'm creating that. And I knew I'm choosing to jam my schedule with things that I'm really loving. And I look at my calendar now and it's like, I don't have time to just go on a coffee date with somebody. Someone's like, hey, can I go on a coffee date? You want to meet for coffee or something, or pick your brain? Or I have to say no a lot more to things and focus more on what I do want to do. But in that busyness and in that fuller schedule, which I'm loving, I'm not looking ahead the whole time at like what's coming. I'm enjoying the thing I'm doing. And I'm getting better at that, which makes me feel happier because that's the thing I've actually been talking about wanting to do, is to just be present and follow the bouncing ball. I used to hear this teacher of mine in paramedic school. He's great, funny, great teacher. And he would always, we're getting bombarded in 4 months with all this paramedic school stuff, right? And I'm like, oh man, how are we going to absorb and understand all this shit in a 4-month period? It's supposed to be like a 2-year class or whatever. So it was like a super dense program. And he would always bring peace to me because he'd come in, clean up the class, and he would just help us to understand a little bit better. And at the end, he'd be like, Anderson, just follow the bouncing ball, trust the process. And he would always say that. I'm like, what a dick, like, you don't know what it's like, I was trying to be like, okay with being stressed about it. I wasn't that stressed at the time, but more than I probably needed to be. But I'm getting better at following the bouncing ball and just focusing on right here. Yeah, you'd be good at scheduling. So if I could tell my younger self or other people that we're so stressed about everything and we're always thinking ahead, and I'm like, dude, just be there. Like that guy that just passed away. It's like he's gone now at 42, healthiest guy ever. And you'd think that guy's going to live to be 100. He's over. So it's like life is precious. Enjoy it. Enjoy the moment. Be more present. Be more lucid. Take some breaths, like breathe, because that is your foundation of being more present. So just breathing, more awareness. Bring awareness to your breath. It'll bring you more present, and see how that goes, because I feel like that's where all the opportunities come that you would have missed if you were thinking about the future or trying to overplan and create. So personally, I'm experimenting with that, and I like the way it feels. And I think I'm going to double down on it for the next few years and see what happens. So yeah, just take a few breaths, slow it down, try to be more lucid.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. And I think from that space, you can love people more too. Like you're more present with the people in your life. So, but thank you for doing this, brother.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
It's good practice, and it's fun to explore and do this for you and with you. And
yeah,
I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with your podcast. That'll be fun.
Absolutely. And I think there's people in my life on the East Coast that will want to listen to your podcast. So I'll put everything in the notes and give them the opportunity to check your stuff out as well.
Cool. Thanks, man. It's
Thank
been
you.
fun.
Hell yeah.